Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us today. My name is Darwin Payne. I'm the curator at the museum, and this living history conversation is an extension of our museum's ongoing oral history project, which is this archival initiative that we've been doing since the museum opened that has gathered about 2,500 recordings, memories from people all around the world about the life, death, and legacy of President Kennedy and the broader history and culture of the 1960s. So I'm glad you could be with us today for this special presentation. I'm in conversation today with my friend, Darwin Payne, who is a good friend and longtime supporter of our institution here. And he's going to share his extraordinary story of the weekend of the Kennedy assassination, where he was and what he experienced. Darwin, let's jump right in with a picture of you taken on November 22nd, 1963, about 60 years ago.
Yeah.
You're the young man there on the right.
As I recall.
Yeah.
It is.
And you are busily taking notes. This is shortly after the assassination at the corner.
It was probably 1:30, something like that.
Yeah, right at the corner of Elm and Houston, right outside this building here, as evidence is being brought out. You see this detective here carefully holding a Coke bottle that was found on the 6th floor of the building. That's Dallas Police Detective Marvin Johnson. And actually, Marvin Johnson's family is here today. Can you guys wave and we can recognize you? Thank you so much for being here. Marvin Johnson was one of the detectives involved in searching the Texas School Book Depository following the assassination. So Darwin, let's start, if we could, a little before November 22nd. Let's go about a month ahead of time to October 24th, 1963, another important day in local history, when United Nations Ambassador Adlai Stevenson was in Dallas. And what happened that night helped to kind of characterize the image of Dallas after the Kennedy assassination. You were there that night. What do you remember?
I was not assigned as a reporter, however, but I knew that something seemed about to happen because there had been a lot of leaflets thrown around, tree warning for trees, and I didn't have that title.
Anti-Kennedy propaganda.
Yeah, and with mugshots of Kennedy acting as if he'd been arrested. So before that, there'd been the Bruce Alger incident, which then demonstrated against LBJ and Ladybird.
Right.
And it shocked the nation to see the behavior of our demonstrators. And the same, of course, with Adlai Stevenson.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to tell me?
Yeah, this picture is outside Memorial Auditorium that evening in October. And we're talking about less than a month before President Kennedy visited Dallas. So tell me what happened to Stevenson that night.
Well, the program was a shambles because of the ultra-right-wing demonstrators who were there. And when and they were present, I could see them outside the building as I appeared with my lights. And once you got inside, there were all sorts of shouts and declamations against the UN that it was a red organization. And I remember there was a guy, Billy Joyner, a candidate for the Texas legislature, was demonstrating. He was in an Uncle Sam suit, carrying a poster. And once you got in, you could tell there about half the people were anti-UN people.
Yeah.
And when Stanley Marcus was introducing Adlai Stevenson, it had something to do with getting him to Dallas for that. And of course, Stevenson was the UN ambassador. And Stanley of Neiman Marcus was probably, I'm sure, shocked, as he had never been shocked before when he started introducing Adlai, because they were booing and hissing about Stanley Marcus. I don't think he'd ever introduced anybody or been in an event where he was booed the way he was at that. And then just as he gave the name of Adlai, how he was going to speak, there was somebody in the audience, like on the front row, like Fred Scott here, Courtney, and he had a bullhorn. And then had a meeting there with the ultra-right wingers, Edwin A. Walker being one of them, just the same place the night before.
That's right.
And so he got up with the bullhorn. Mr. Ambassador, before you speak, we demand that you answer these questions. Everybody's shouting for that. About, as I say, at least half the people in the audience were anti-UN people and very vocal about that. So Edwin spoke with him a little bit, saying, well, give me an opportunity or wait till later I'll let you speak first, then we'll talk about it. Trying to be very cordial and being shocked, however. And finally, the police came and escorted Frank McGee, he was his name. He was chair of the National Indignation Committee, which he had started. And there were so many ultra right-wing organizations that they got him off the stage, the floor. And thereafter, the meeting was still almost ruined by the people who walked up and down the stairway there. And with little crickets, on Halloween, when you go out with a metallic thing and making those noises, coughing incessantly, displaying signs occasionally.
Yeah.
And so it was, after it was over, it still wasn't over, because I'd said 100, 150 probably people, demonstrators, were waiting outside looking for Adley to come out. And they waited forever. My wife and I waited too, because we wanted to see what would happen. I mean, I had the news band in me, even though I wasn't there covering it. Keith Shelton was covering it from the Times Herald. And finally, they were looking, and he came out of a side door with Stanley. It was Val N., a reporter for the Times Herald, who was just a guest, not a reporter, but very interested in UN affairs. And so there he is. And everybody started charging toward the car that they were about to get into. Stanley saw them coming and thought he'd wait just a little bit and converse with them. Maybe persuade them, that seemed to be, or Adley. Did I say Stanley? Adley. And so we watched him run up there, and we sort of ran along too, not being part of the group, but wanting to see what would happen. And that's where you saw the woman Adley on the end with the sign. Mm-hmm. She said somebody pushed her elbow and made it happen, which seemed unlikely.
Yeah.
And so people spitting at Adley, some young people doing that. And then finally, they started rocking the car when Adley was still standing outside the car, trying to talk to these people. And with that side on each side of the car, shoving it like that, back and forth. And so much that I thought it was going to turn over. And they were trying to turn it over. There's no question about that. And finally, I think it was Stanley Marcus who said to Adley, you better get in here, so get out of here. And they managed to leave. And so that was the incident that got nationwide publicity, just as the Bruce Alger incident had. And people declared Dallas being the city of shame instead of the reputation that it had, which was a fine reputation. And that was very widespread.
Yeah, this
comments.
Vocal minority that kind of characterized the city's political atmosphere. And it was a story of national significance, but just a blip that would have probably been forgotten very quickly were it not for November 22nd, 1963, when suddenly all of these incidents leading up to Kennedy's visit took on a symbolic significance.
Yes, and I remember you had these people like Barefoot Sanders, Adlai Stevenson himself, Sarah D. Hughes, federal judge. They were telling the president not to come to Dallas.
Yeah.
And said, and Marcus said it would be a grave mistake to come to Dallas. And so Dallas was very concerned during this time period, and all the leaders of the city, the Dallas Citizens Council, Dallas County, I forget their exact time of the moment. You can give it to me there.
Well, the Dallas Citizens Council.
Dallas Citizens Council, right. And so that prominent part of Dallas was very worried, and the city passed an ordinance against violating interruption of meetings, that sort of thing.
Yeah. But of course, despite those warnings, Kennedy did make Dallas an important part of his itinerary on his 2 days in Texas. We're looking at a picture of the Dallas Times-Herald newsroom on November 22nd, 1963, and this is where you were when the assassination took place.
Yes.
How did you find out?
Well, I was doing a story there that morning when the Kennedys arrived at Love Field. My assignment, and everybody had an assignment because it was going to be very well covered. My assignment was to write a story about Jackie Kennedy and her appearance at Love Field with the president, and what the crowd was doing and all that. So it was a very receptive audience. They were thrilled because they were mostly the Democrats who'd been shut out of the planning for the Kennedy visit because it was the Dallas Citizens Council really doing the planning. And And go ahead.
Yeah, how did word reach you that there had been a
Okay.
shooting in the motorcade?
Our city editor was following the police reports from the dispatcher, from George Carter, the police reporter, and he was relaying the information to Ken Smart, the city editor. And finally, Ken said, they're sending homicide ambulance code 3 to the triple underpass, thinking that was the location rather than Dealey Plaza. But of course, as you know, the triple underpass was just down the way from Dealey Plaza. And he's been hit was the next word. And what with, I thought and asked, because Stevenson just been hit on the head with a sign.
Right.
And then shots have been fired. Darwin, drop that story on Jackie. I was having trouble with it anyway. Writing that story about her wonderful suit that she was wearing, raspberry, the black and all, and Val Lee and a reporter there trying to interpret it for me. And the reason Val couldn't do it because you're at the scene, you had to have somebody in the office with a typewriter,
right,
to get the information and couldn't get it. And so the city editor had me run down to Dealey Plaza and Brady. He thought it was a triple underpass with, and Paul Rosenfield was asked to go with me. And so we got there as quickly as we could. It couldn't have been more than 20 minutes.
Yeah.
In fact, not long ago, I tested that with my wife. Of course, here I am, 60 years older than I was. But when I was writing this manuscript, I had put in there, probably took us 15 minutes to get there. I tried to duplicate what we did 60 years earlier.
This year.
And we didn't come around all the way because, neither one of us could, especially Paul, but let's say he was a lot older than I was. And it only took us to get from where the time serial was located, the building's gone down, about 9 minutes.
Wow.
So, and I was exaggerated probably on the number of times we stopped to walk to catch our breath. Mm-hmm. Of course, we finally got there, and it was just as you see in this scene.
Yeah, right outside the Texas School Book Depository. And in some of those photographs taken by other Dallas Times Herald personnel, staff photographers.
Willie Allen.
Willie Allen was there, yeah. And there you are. I'm going to circle you there.
Thank you for circling.
And I think that's Joe Sherman behind you.
Joe Sherman, the Times Herald educational reporter. He was one that was thrown into all the reporters, if you say,
right.
This.
And so what we're seeing here is when the brown paper bag that was found on the 6th floor that allegedly carried the rifle into the building that morning is being brought out. So you're right there with your reporter's notepad. As you were talking to these people, I mean, what information were you gleaning from these investigators as that they would come out of the building?
Oh, well, this was actually, they had been searching all the floors and they were telling us what they found. Mm-hmm. And I guess that sack I don't know exactly where it was found.
It was near the sniper's perch on the 6th floor.
It was right near
that quarter, yeah.
And they took us on each floor, going up to the 6th floor. And so
that was I think that was a little bit later after Zapruder, right?
That was after Zapruder.
Yeah.
Yes.
We can get to Zapruder right now. There he is on the street there.
The Zapruder, yeah.
How did you find out about this dress manufacturer with his home movie camera?
Well, as I looked at the crowd at Dealey Plaza, you see almost everybody in tears. They're very distressed. And the more distressed they were, I thought the more likely that they'd seen more than others because they'd seen some bad things. And I saw 3 or 4 women who worked with Zapruder, under Zapruder at the Jennifer Junior's, the dressmaking company.
Yeah.
And I asked them about it, what they had seen, because people were trying to compare notes as to when they knew the president had been hit, but they thought somebody else had been hit. Maybe John Connally, the governor of Texas, could have been a Secret Service person, they thought. And so they didn't know, and they had seen Jackie crawling out of the back towards the back of the limousine. What in the world was she doing? Trying to escape or what? We know later that she was just getting pieces of the president's skull. And so they told me they knew pretty much. They'd seen the shots pretty close. We said, our boss has film of it. And I said, gosh, where is he? And because, this would be a great find if somebody had been that close to it and they indicated how close he was. So they told me, well, he's in the building next door, the Downtex building, right across the street from where we are right now.
Yeah, right. It's there.
And so we walked over there and he wasn't in the room at the first, but it was a pretty big office room that we stayed. The TV was on. Walter Cronkite was on, talking about the president being wounded, and then growing more and more serious as the minutes passed by. Zapruder came in right quickly after I did with his camera, put it on filing cabinet there, and said, and started watching the TV. We watched it together for about 45 minutes. And his first comments were that, no, he's not just wounded, he's dead. I saw it happen. I was right there, right close with his camera. I saw the bullet hit his head, not that part, but I saw the impact of the bullet hitting his head, and I saw it explode just like a firecracker. And so I knew that was a very important quote to have. I thought it told the whole story. He said, he has to be dead. He has to be dead. And he got sort of irritated at the news for not carrying that fact, but they were being very careful to wait for a proclamation of death.
And right there on top of that file cabinet was the home movie camera that held the most famous home movie of the 20th century right next to you.
I thought about it. But I knew I couldn't take that camera and run away.
But you suggested that perhaps the Dallas Times-Herald could help, right?
I did. I said, when he was reelected, he said, I've got to give it to the Secret Service or the FBI. I said, well, we have contacts with them. We have good contacts. You could come with me. We go with the camera to the newspaper office. They'll develop the film. I had no idea that they would be unable to develop that film because of the nature of it. And but no, he didn't want to. So I told the person, I had been a rewrite person for live film. Now there was a rewrite person for me because I was at the scene. So that was Bill Bates was his name. And I said, you should get somebody with more authority than me to the telephone, and I'll tell them what we have. And so he got James Chambers Jr., who was the president of the Times-Herald. And I talked to him first, suggesting that he tell him what we had there, what we thought we had. Nobody knew for sure. Get a time, but he's very reluctant to come. I said, but if you have a car with the Dallas Times-Herald on the side, come down here or send it down here. And we'll get in the car. He'll be assured that he's been officially in a car, but he declined to do that too.
Yeah, and ultimately you got kicked out of the office basically by
I did.
Secret Service.
Yes, one of the secrets of the Forest Sorrells.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Now, I would shortly after that interesting conversation with Zapruder over the film. 3 men came into the office. And they were then in the office, very well dressed and all that. One was Forrest Sorrell's director of the local Secret Service representative.
Right.
Another was a man I'd never seen before, well dressed. He happened to be Zapruder's partner in the business, as I later learned. And the third one was Harry McCormick, the famous police reporter from the Dallas Morning News, who had been very active in covering things like Bonnie and Clyde's story, 20s and the 30s and the 40s, very white-haired, distinctive looking, and sort of a special place, Dallas Morning News. So I recognized him, although I'd never met him, and I'd seen him before. So they closed. I started going into this side office with them. And no, sorry, this is private business. And McCormick was already in the office too. So as a Times-Herald reporter, what was I to do? I had to be in the office too. So I said, no, I have to be here. Here's Harry McCormick of the Dallas Morning News. Yeah. And that's my opposition. So if he's there, I've got to be there. And then they kicked out McCormick.
Yeah.
That's too stern an expression, actually. But he went out. They told him to go out. He did. He went after they left. I started trying to follow them, but I thought I went back to the telephone to tell them what was happening. And they left the building here. And from there, they took a quick stop at the Morning News to see if they could develop the film, but they couldn't do it either. And so they went to Kodak, Eastman Kodak.
Yeah. This was at Channel 8 WFAN studio. Zapruder was very, very briefly on the air, and they weren't able to.
They didn't know what they had.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, before you went anywhere else, while you were still here in Dealey Plaza, you did manage to get into the Texas School Book Depository and go up to the 6th floor.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
I didn't manage. I was invited with about 5 others to come up to the 6th floor because they had found the sniper's lair and they'd found the rifle as we Now we seen the big bag came in, but then that too. And they wanted to give us a tour of the sixth floor, show us where Oswald, they didn't have his name at that time.
Law enforcement offered to give members of the news media a tour of the crime scene.
That's right.
Okay.
Because they were wanting, I think the city of Dallas already by then, Elgin Crow, the city manager, who acted the police chief, they're all did that in there. And it still does in their form of local government. Wanted to show some cooperation with the press and not be too difficult to deal with. So they invited us. I think there were 6 of us or 7. We have their names. I can't call them off to go up. So we came and followed the detectives up. The elevator, the freight elevator, stopped at each floor. At each floor, you could see an officer with a rifle posted. Second floor, third, going up to the 6th, and there we got off. They took us to the window of the 6th floor, and the 6th or so, I was stood in line to look out the window to see what was out there, what kind of view the shooter wanted to have.
Right.
And one of those present was Ken Biffle. I was at Fort Worth Press, who'd been a good friend of mine when I was at the press, a veteran of the Army. I was a 6-month veteran of the Army. No, actually, I went through that heritage camp. Let me go into that. I think it was legal. So I was called to active duty with the Berlin Wall when our 49th Armored Division was activated. Oh. So we went to Fort Polk for a year because of that.
Yeah.
And so I'd had all that experience shooting rifles. So had Kent Biffle. And the distance, as we looked at that window, said, well, it doesn't seem to be that difficult a shot. And I think it turned out to be about 250 yards.
Yeah.
Is that about right?
Well, 88 yards, about 265 feet, give or take.
Okay.
Yeah, 88 from the window to the fatal shot on Elm Street.
88 yards?
88 yards.
I thought it was farther than that. Okay, but I don't know. We got a marker. Yeah. Somebody's got a marker in the street.
Yeah, there's an unofficial X.
That would not have been a terribly difficult shot then.
Yeah. I mean, it's in the eye of the beholder, depending upon what your perspective is on the assassination. But looking out that window, you felt, as someone who had experience with a rifle, you felt like it was an achievable shot.
I did, certainly. Kent did as well, and I think the others did too.
Yeah. Well, let's see. From the Texas School Book Depository, I believe you made your way over to the Oak Cliff section of Dallas, and this is 1026 North Beckley, where Oswald was living at the time. What do you remember about your visit here?
Oh, it was a very memorable visit because first I went to the office finishing up at Stubik Depository in the city up there, had another address to give me. It's just not the triple underpass, but this one, 1026 North Beckley. Said, this is where we found our boy. This is where he's from, boy, he called him. And so I got my car and drove to 1026 North Beckley. By then it was getting pretty dark. But I could see news wagons out in front, lights on inside. And so I went up and didn't knock or anything. He just walked up, opened the door, went in, and started interviewing the owners of this place. It was a rooming house. There were about 17 roomers who lived there. It looked small, but there was a lot of space in the back that had ventilation. And talked to them about Oswald, and which I knew the right name. Yeah, they had rented it to him under the name of O.H. Lee, and it was later after I arrived that I found out they didn't know it was Oswald. And I talked to them about his character, what they knew about him. They knew not much at all about him because he would come to work early in the morning, come on early, stay in the room, and his little room was at the side of the building. You can go there now and tour that place.
Yeah.
He was a loner, didn't mix with anybody, didn't talk to other people, and also talked to Attorney Roberts, the house, what do we call her, in charge of taking care of the house.
The
housekeeper. And she told me a lot of things about it as well. And I asked her a lot of questions, knowing that I really had to find out everything I could about it. No, he was an orderly person. He didn't talk to the other people at all, hardly at all, just a few words. No, he never had visitors at night. He never left the house at seemed to dine except on weekends when he would go see Marita. She didn't know about Marita.
Yeah.
And she's the one that told me his name was not O.H. Lee, but it was Lee Harding Oswald. So as well, does he have women coming there? No, never. And never went out to meet anybody. Didn't really guess. They would hear him talk on the telephone once in a while. They had access to a telephone. And he could speak 2 different foreign languages. And they thought it was either German or Russian. And they thought it was Russian. And of course, it was Russian. He was trying to talk to Marina, who by then had left him.
Right.
French.
The rumors they had a nickname for Oswald, didn't they?
Yes, they did. They had finally, after I talked to Earlene Roberts for a while and sort of gained her confidence, she was pleased to be asked questions. She said, well, there is one funny, I was asking you at the end, what else? There is one funny thing about it, that some of the rumors about it developed. Because when he would get up to go to the bathroom, he would sort of, before he entered the door, he'd sort of twist his butt in a strange way. And we called him the butt twister. And that was when the dance, the twist, that was the dance that was popular at that time, but he was the butt twister. I'm surprised you asked that question.
I'm surprised in retrospect that I did too, but little details like that don't get recorded anywhere else, and so we're glad to have that as part of the historical record.
It's in the book.
It is in the book, so that keep that in mind. So Friday ends for you, and I'm curious because you're a reporter, you're on the scene, clearly doing a lot of stuff professionally. At what point did the emotional magnitude of the death of the president really hit you just as an individual, as an American?
Well, it's hard to hit me as an individual since I knew I was a reporter, but I was very distressed over it. Everybody was distressed, all the journalists, photographers, news persons. And the impact was on me. I was thinking of history, actually, and somewhat aware of the fact that McKinley had been assassinated in 1901, and that had been a lot of years ago. And it was a terrific impact on American history. Whether or not the Shah missed him, even, it would be a big story. So I knew that I had to do my very best, and the others did too, that I was sort of writing history in effect. Not so much as I should have thought, because the real history comes later on when you put everything into perspective and more information.
At that moment in 1963, it would have been 62 years since William McKinley's assassination. We're here at the 60th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination, so almost the same amount of time has elapsed.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. But the first three assassinations, of course, occurred within about a 35-year period.
Right.
1865 to 1901.
That's right.
36.
Yeah. Let's go to Saturday for a moment, because on Saturday you were in this building, the Dallas Municipal Complex with City Hall and police headquarters. And the outside of the building looks pretty normal, but the inside was anything but, because we have this incredible scene. About 300 members of the World Press descended upon police headquarters, and you're in there somewhere.
Somewhere in there.
Tell me about
on the time.
Tell me about your experience in the hallways of police headquarters.
It was a total disaster, really. And looking at crowd scene and how they handled themselves, the floor was a mess with food wrappings and Coke bottles, or I think that's about as severe as the bottles got. And because these were reporters who had come from miles around and other parts of the country, because they had time to get there by Saturday, and even other nations who were there. And so I walked in, and I was a little bit fearful of going to it because I did not have a press pass. I thought there would be great security to get into the building where Oswald was being held prisoner. And I was afraid I wouldn't get past muster to get in. So I worried about that. And also, as I approached the building, I saw that there were hardly any individuals around. There were no mobs of civilians around it at all. I thought, I wonder why that is. I mean, it seems strange. But they were all at home, I think, watching TV. That's where they were getting their constant news feed.
Yeah.
It said something about what was happening according to in the future. So I went in at my usual pathway, the police station, and nobody asked me anything. I got the elevator, went up to the third floor where that was, and nobody there except these people. And among the people I saw, by the way, three young teenagers. One was dressed in a sailor suit. I think he was actually even sailing and just dating and John and two friends about the same age. And I think, my gosh, what in the world are they doing in here? And it turned out that one of the sailors said, well, I was writing a story for my high school paper. And so we just came in. So everybody had access. Jack Ruby had access to it on that day, and nobody stopped in because he had many friends on the police department, of course. They like to, many of them, of course, like to go to the Carousel Club over by the Adolphus Hotel of a different caliber, of course.
The balding gentleman that you see on the left, kind of on the left-hand side of this picture, that's Dallas Police Chief Jesse Curry. And you noticed something that occurred that weekend, which is kind of indicative to the chaotic atmosphere, right. And it's actually captured in this photograph. Tell us what we're seeing here.
I'm so glad to see that photograph because I kept wondering recently, was that my imagination or not? But there was a reporter there, and you can see him with his notepad speaking with Chief Curry right in front of the slightly balding man. And he had taken his notepad and put it on his back and used it as a brace to take notes while the chief was talking. I mean, so crowded, he just couldn't do it right the normal way. Then I saw another photographer at one point in here lie down on the floor. I don't know how he did it with that many people, but he lay down on the floor and took a picture up. And I think he wanted to get a picture of the people through Curry's legs, looking through his legs at the reporters who were questioning. And so anyway, and of course these photographers didn't have our cell phones today. They had to find places to call their offices wherever they were. All the other detective offices were on the third floor. And burglary, homicide, robbery, all those. And they would go into those offices and countermand telephones.
Yeah.
And some tensions that developed over that. Others found it enjoyable to meet with the reporters and give them telephones.
Yeah, the Dallas police were remarkably accommodating to the visiting journalists from around the country. This is Dallas Police Chief Jesse Curry we've been talking about. Darwin, you have another Jesse Curry story from the night before Oswald was shot.
Yes.
Do you want to tell us that?
Like our deadline that night was about 1:30. Before the next morning, 1:30. So I was going to stay until I think 2, theoretically, and I did. But there was word over from our city desk, and I was in communications with them as things developed. They had heard that there was a radio story up in New York City. I guess it had a broader audience than that, but by Dan Rather, saying that the police had in custody, protective custody, an eyewitness who could positively identify Oswald. And the city desk had heard that, and they talked to me and said, well, have you heard anything about that? Is there one in custody who had been positively identifying? Because they wanted a positive identification for the trial. Not so many who said, well, it might have been Oswald. But so I needed to find out. There was a night police chief on duty. He knew nothing about it. And another police chief had a different title, I think. No, he hadn't heard anything about that. And so how was I to find out? So to go to the police chief. The police chief was long gone by that time. And I said, I'll have to have his telephone numbers. And they're very reluctant about that. But finally, time passed, nothing developed, and I got the telephone number for the chief.
The police gave you the chief of police's home telephone number.
That's right, the home telephone. So I sort of dreaded calling him. I wasn't certain about the story. I knew what sort of pressure he had been under all this time. And he had to be sound asleep or maybe totally unasleep.
What time is this?
This was about 1 a.m.
Okay.
So I called that number. Woman answered the phone. And obviously sound asleep, the woman who was his wife. And told her, I'm a local reporter, Dallas Times Herald, and we've heard this, and I'd like to talk to your husband. I'm a little fast. He called him, but it was his wife. I'd like to talk to the Chief Curry. So she said, okay. And I could tell just a slight shuffling. She woke him up and handed him the telephone. And I started explaining what I had heard, what we had heard at the time zero about this person, eyewitness in protective custody. And he couldn't understand the thing I said because he was so sound asleep. Perhaps he had taken sleeping pills. I wouldn't have blamed him, and he might have. But I talked, asking questions, trying to put it in as simple words as I could, and then jotting down the words that he would say, like, well, no, we're at this side. That made no sense.
Yeah.
And thought, well, maybe I can interpret those after. But of course I couldn't.
Yeah.
And I finally gave it up and gave it up. But there was no such person in protective custody. There was another person, though, that was an eyewitness named Howard Brennan, who had seen him carefully just before the assassination. And then he saw him come to the window in the sixth floor with a rifle, looking straight till he saw him firing shots. And he had been the first one to alert the police to say, look, I saw the guy that shot the president, and because he was right outside your lane entrance.
The Currys, I think, left their phone off the hook after your
call. Forget to tell you that, because the other officers were determined to, but the FBI, the sheriff's office, the Sheriff Decker, and others, maybe those were the main order, maybe the FBI should had called warning of threats that were being made by this very very sophisticated voice who then saying Oswald will be killed on the transfer tomorrow. And I have a group of people who are ready to move on it. We're organized and have plans. And we wanted to call and alert the police, alert the FBI, that we are not going to interfere with them. We're not going to kill anybody or injure any officer. It's their intention not to. So we wanted to alert you that this might happen, and for you to. The implication was that they might help to effect, prevent it possible to stand aside from Oswald while they shot him or did something. They were worried about that because it didn't sound like just anybody off the street making an idle phone call. Because it come to the sheriff's office, police department, FBI, and those were responsible people who thought that they meant something. And so they tried to call police Chief Perry at home, and something was wrong with the telephone. It was after I talked to him, and they kept checking with the telephone company, and they finally said, no, the phone is off the hook. You can't reach him. They did finally get to it about 7 or 8 in the morning when he got up. But then it was so late. And what Decker wanted was going to receive the prisoner and give him the jail cell in the county jail. And that was the way it worked in those days. He was determined to persuade Curry to transfer Oswald earlier, before the 10 a.m. time that Curry had given the reporters before he left at the police station. Curry did not really, I think, mean I'll transfer him at 10. He told the reporters, if you're here by 10 in the morning, you won't miss anything. He was very reluctant to do that, and he did that only under great pressure. And if you listen to him carefully, you knew that he was saying, if you get here by 10, that's will that. That did not mean that he would transfer him precisely at 10 a.m.
Yeah. Well, let's move on now. After the shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald, let's take a step back and look at the broader story of Dallas. We started our conversation today talking about the political extremism in the city that characterized the city leading up to the president's assassination. Tell me about that stigma after President Kennedy's death. How did people around the world view Dallas in the aftermath?
Well, they viewed Dallas as a wild, unforgivable city, that permitted all these things prior to the president's visit, as well as the president's visit, to happen. However, official Dallas, the city council, the others who were in charge of things, more responsible people than well-known people, had worked terribly hard during that month period between Stevens and Kennedy's. And the visit itself had worked. There had been no problems except for the full-page ad in the Dallas Morning News, which is unfortunate. And, but people outside hardly thought about that. I mean, outside Dallas. And so we're in very bad state at that time. However, our mayor, Earl Camel, decided to campaign to run for office. He resigned as mayor, ran for office for as the representative of Dallas County to Congress, and he defeated Bruce Alger in the election that occurred. Also, at the same time, Dallas had 9 representatives in the state legislature. 8 of the 9 were Republicans. And of course, those demonstrators had been principally far-right Republicans. And in the election that occurred, all 8 Republicans were defeated if they even ran again, and 9 Democrats were elected in their place. And then, of course, Eric Johnson was a key point that he became mayor. He was appointed to the city council, became mayor, and a great vision for Dallas, including the mid-cities airport, which was very important for Dallas and Fort Worth, and created ultimately this huge area that we have that's one of the biggest in the nation. He had a fine new city hall built by A&P. They won a lot of praise and still does. He started the Goals for Dallas program, in which people of all walks of life could participate in setting long-term goals for Dallas. And so the result of that was about 6 or 7 years later, Look magazine declared Dallas an all-American city. And so I would say in the early 80s, Dallas had lost much of the stigma.
Yeah. It's so fascinating that Dallas was characterized as this ultra right-wing community, yet the man accused of murdering the president was a left-leaning Marxist. It's surprising, and I think is what has helped fuel conspiracy belief over the years, that there's got to be more to the story than this young ex-Marine.
I think that's correct. That's what I had this.
Now, you have a new book. You've written several books, including a biography of Eric Johnson that came out a few years ago called No Small Dreams. But this book, Behind the Scenes, is really your story of covering the Kennedy assassination. I want to talk about that, but you guys should have gotten question cards in your chairs today. If you have questions for Darwin Payne, we'll collect those in just a moment and go through a few of those in the time we have left. Darwin, tell us about this book. Why 60 years after the assassination, you're finally telling this part of your story?
Well, I had attempted to write a book about 100 pages right after the assassination, but I was young and unskilled really as a writer of a book, and other people more experienced people came out with their books, and I gave up that idea. But as the 60th anniversary approached, I thought this may be the last big one, because people like me, my fellow reporters and so many other people who were here in 1963 will be gone. So at some point, it's going to play out. And this could be the time. This would be the right time for me to tell my story, plus the research that I did as well.
You've gone on to become a professor of journalism at Southern Methodist University. You've written a number of books, including the definitive, real modern history of Dallas called Big D. In the totality of Dallas history and culture, where do you think the Kennedy assassination fits in?
Well, of course, it's the biggest historical event we've ever had in Dallas. And I think it's played a very important role in Dallas history. The effort to get out under the enigma of being the site of the assassination, which was done and carefully done. And it brought many improvements to the city.
I'm going to anticipate a potential audience question and ask you, do you think Oswald acted alone, or do you think there was a conspiracy?
Okay, I welcome that question. I think he acted alone, and there's much evidence to support that. And I read just recently about the 7 doctors at Parkland, who got one, and I haven't examined carefully who got them. Don't know what they've read really, but that's just one tiny thing about the state. They think that there was a second shooter, on the other side of Oswald and do you think, how could you have Oswald taking his 3 shots from here and then yet another assassin further down the road that they had no connection? And And they could have mistaken some things in their analysis of that. And because many things like that have come up through the years. And I think this one will be found to be maybe an effort on their part not to go ahead and happen.
Back at the 30th anniversary, back in 1993, you helped to organize a symposium at Southern Methodist University. Really, I think the largest reunion ever of journalists who covered the Kennedy assassination. I'm curious, having been one of the organizers of that, what was the consensus among your colleagues, professional colleagues from around the country, as far as belief in a conspiracy or Oswald acting alone?
There were some different opinions, but the majority opinion by a considerable edge was that he acted alone in defense. But you really can't make it determine history out of one day. I mean, it takes a while to get all the facts.
Yeah. We've got one question here, but it's a good one. Do you think that Oswald would have been killed if the chief of police had received the call made at 2 a.m.? The one he couldn't get because his phone was off the hook.
Well, of course not. That's not.
I think someone holds you responsible for something, Darwin, but that's okay. That's okay. There's plenty more stories in the book that flesh out your experience.
Maybe I misunderstood the question. The question was whether Jesse Curry would get up and get him.
No. No. Do you think that had Jesse Curry gotten those warnings?
Maybe not. Because, he was in charge of transfer.
Yeah.
And it was in the middle of the night. He'd guarantee it no later than 10 a.m. transfer. What? Or no sooner than that.
Yeah. Do you feel a sense of
I feel a bit of guilt about it, actually.
Yeah.
But I couldn't resist trying to call him, I think.
Sure, you had no idea what was coming the very next day.
Any other questions?
This is our only question.
I'll do you one other thing. Anyone asked me about the bubble top on that. My friend Jim there was a good reporter at the Times Herald. Early in the morning on that day, he tried to call the Secret Service or the FBI or whoever would be in charge. And we had rain that morning. And he wanted to know whether the bubble top would be on. He couldn't find anybody who could tell him. Finally, he probably with Forrest Sorrell stepping in, get a Secret Service. But the guy said, what the heck? Take it off. Because they knew the president wanted it out.
Right.
So Jim always worried about the fact that he'd been possibly the cause of them taking off the bubble top because he was calling so early, he may have made a decision. And if it hadn't been, Oswald wouldn't have had a clear shot if he had tried to shoot through a bubble top. There was not bulletproof after all, but you can be very accurate. But Jim worried about that. He even wrote 2 novels.
He did.
Concerning people involved with that.
Yeah. We got one more question, then we'll wrap up the program. Time changes perceptions. How have yours changed about the assassination since you were a young reporter in 1963?
Well, they haven't changed greatly. At the beginning, in the very first months, every reporter was looking around for a conspiracy. Who worked with Oswald? Who did he know? And there was a small Russian community in Dallas that accepted Marina, his wife. And he didn't even like those people. He didn't want Marina associated with England. But so people were looking for something. And people around town, like Penn Jones, the Nicholasson leader, gave me a copy of the Zabrina film. There was a copy of a copy of a copy somehow it had broken loose, telling me that I try to find out about this and it deals a conspirator. You could follow a conspiracy theory. Yeah.
Well, I know we're all grateful to you for putting your stories down on paper and writing this book. We have signed copies downstairs in our museum store, and I believe you're actually going to go down there in a few minutes to sign or personalize books. Okay. Now you know you're going to have to, because I just said you were. So please join me in thanking Darwin Payne for being our guest today.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.